In 1977, one small town in Ohio became the target of the wrath of an anonymous letter writer. The citizens of Circleville, Ohio began to receive letters, and not just a few trickling into their mailboxes here and there, but thousands of them over decades. This unknown fury made some pretty awful accusations about Circleville, but its residents were involved in terrible things: corruption, embezzlement, domestic violence, affairs, and even murder. Letter after letter, year after year, this anonymous author was relentless. But were they just writing fiction? Or did they somehow have access to some of the most private details from people's lives? Were the terrible things they were writing about their neighbors, their friends, their family really true? Who was the author, and what did they want from this one small town? What would it take to make them stop? Or would they? How far was the Circleville letter writer willing to go?
Stay away from Massey. Don't lie when asked about knowing him.
Don't lie when asked about knowing him.
I know where you live and have been observing your house.
And have been observing your house.
I know where you live and have been observing your house and know you have children.
This is no joke. Please take it serious.
This is no joke.
Everyone concerned has been notified.
This is no joke.
Please take it serious.
Everyone concerned has been notified, and everything will be over soon.
Everyone concerned has been notified, and everything will be over soon.
And everything will be over soon.
This season of Whatever Remains, we untangle a decade's worth of police records, hundreds of pages of court transcripts and public records, crime scene reports, and reread the letters themselves, some not made public in decades, and we try and track their origin. We'll learn more about the lives of the people of Circleville that lived under this shadow for years and how these letters wore at this community. And we talk to law enforcement and to one private investigator who still works to try and solve this ongoing mystery. We'll try to figure out who is behind the Circleville letters, the anonymous writer with a grudge to bear on a small town, and what really could have been their reason to flood Circleville with so much malice. Join us in the search on Twitter at Whatever Remains or online at whateverremainspodcast.com. Be sure to subscribe to the show on iTunes or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Remember, what goes around comes around. Welcome to Circleville.
When tears come fast and furious in this town called Malice. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so, Marie, it's come to this.
Ah, not this. Anything but this.
So, dear listeners, this episode, we had a Twitter poll.
It's what it's come to.
It's what it's come to. We had a Twitter poll on Twitter.
Well, that was our first mistake.
It was our first Twitter poll, too. And so, we asked...
Could be the last.
We asked what people thought this episode should be called.
Oh, God, what it should be called.
And people said that it should be called Dogs with Jobs, which is a great name. So the other options, we had 45 votes, which was pretty damn good if I do say so myself.
That's really impressive.
Yeah. The other options were Spooky Valley Ranch.
Nice.
Yeah, thank you. Nice. More Like Boardwalker. Dogs with Jobs, which took it with 40%. Mm-hmm. And then finally UFO Proof.
Oh, wait, I'm going to guess the one that you would have voted for, which is More Like Boardwalker.
I didn't vote for any of them because it was my own poll, Marie.
I know, but like the one that you were secretly pulling for, More Like Boardwalker.
Well, the one, yeah, the problem is with episode titles like this, I always try to make them kind of funny, and then people... Like, we don't even say that, like, we don't say the title, or, you know what I mean? Like, it's just in the title of the download the episode. So I'm hoping that I will get out of people who read the title kind of that, like, you don't really laugh, but you sort of blow air out of your nose. You know?
Is that what we're going for?
That's my goal. Really?
Sort of a blowhole kind of thing?
Yeah.
Like a whale or... Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
kind of a, yeah.
Yeah.
And,
all right. Sort of more of not an ironic, snidey laugh.
No,
just like
just
a genuine,
kind of a, like,
but not a chuckle. We're not chuckling. We're not... Oh, yeah, okay. We're appreciating it, but we're not chuckling.
Exactly.
It's a fine line, man. It's a fine line. Dogs with Jobs is pretty good, actually.
With this one, though, the ranch's story is so overblown. And it's such a small, like, it's such a, to me, it is the least interesting thing Bigelow does in this period of time.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
That,
I can see it.
You know, it's kind of, I wanted to call the episode, something like spooky action at a almost astronomical distance. Just because nothing happens on the ranch the entire time that they're there, practically. And when it does happen to them, it doesn't happen to them. It happens to the people that they, like, the people who sold them this ranch for a bunch of money and told them it was spooky. And not even a bunch of money, actually. The Shermans got screwed, but...
Well, I mean, they must have wanted to get rid of it, though, too. I mean...
I'm sure
honestly,
they did, but still, that's a significant cut. Anyways, whatever. We're getting into this.
I would agree. Dogs with Jobs, because the other good thing is it works on many levels.
It does.
Dogs with Jobs. It could be the wolves or whatever dressed up in people's clothing, right?
Yeah.
It's a dog with job.
Yeah, it's a dog with a job, spooking people.
It's a dog with job. Well, he's a day
Spooking
trader,
idiots.
man. No. He was just on his way somewhere, and he inadvertently spooked. But you don't know, man. I mean, he could have been like real estate agent,
right? Or it's a
Banana
ranch.
Republic.
It's
I don't
a
know.
ranch, so dogs often are ranch dogs.
Well, yes, they do work there. But again, as we have found out, Skinwalker Ranch, this is the one thing, this is like the only thing that I've really retained from this very short period, too. There's like maybe 2 stories that kind of stuck with me. Dogs don't fare well.
No.
Dogs don't fare well
dogs don't do great.
Dogs don't do too well doing their job on this type of a ranch. Which is kind of BS if you ask me. And again, it's why I feel like orbs are kind of the jerks. Orbs are kind of the a-holes of the paranormal, activity world there. Mm-hmm. Orbs.
Mm-hmm. 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 Dog who barks prepared to get snarked.
Snarked, yeah. Or just, yeah.
That should have been the title. All right. Jake, roll the tape.
Bark and get snarked.
I tried my best, Marie.
No, it's not bad.
I
think dogs who work are actually
zarked, splattered.
What are you being for Halloween this year?
Me? Mm-hmm. Drunk. What are you being for Halloween this year, Marie?
But you mean that's like every other Tuesday?
Yeah, but I'm gonna wear my shirt with the jack-o'-lantern face on.
Are you? So that's every other. That's like once a month. Then
it's like every other Friday.
Yeah,
essentially,
Friday.
It is one of my favorite shirts by far.
Totally, it is. I am going to be social services from Wes Anderson's movie, Moonlight Kingdom.
Ooh, that's cool.
Oh, I know. Look at that. Yeah.
Wow.
I have it left over. I might try and get that out to go trick or treating and just have people ask me who I am, so I can be a total humanities major a-hole film person and be like, well, let me tell you who I am.
Right. I'm Rosebud.
I'm that person.
All right.
It's really
so I'm that person.
I'm that person. Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry, dear listeners. I'm
all
that
right.
person.
So last episode we talked about Bigelow gets together this team of people. And the
Justice League,
and they have very colorful backgrounds, to say the least. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's a really interesting thing, this group of people that comes together, because the thing is too, there are people who kind of flit in and out of this story as well. Mm-hmm. So like Pudoff has a buddy, Eric Davis, who is also kind of involved in this. But he's also like one of the only people that's been involved who will talk about it a lot. which kind of makes him seem like maybe he wasn't that involved, but he wants you to think he was. It's a little hard to gauge. The thing about the ranch and the thing about Bigelow's time, essentially from kind of, I don't know, really his time in this field in general, but especially from what will happen with MUFON moving forward, and we're going to get into what happens with MUFON, is he will really greatly shun public attention. And that's something that's been the case kind of like his entire life in some ways. It at least seems like. But he will be especially careful in the UFO community to play his cards close to the vest. And so everyone who works on the ranch signs a non-disclosure agreement. And the few people that have come out or come forward and kind of broken, they would say they haven't broken the non-disclosure agreements, but those people that have come forward and now have spoken about being on the ranch and their time there and everything else are those people who no longer work there and who, and frankly, who feel like because this Bigelow team has dissolved, that they're no longer held together by this NDA. And occasionally we'll have documents that'll come out that'll shed some light on how the NIDS team itself operated. But primarily, the most of the information we get about what actually happened on Skinwalker Ranch during this period comes from either Hunt for the Skinwalker, so it's colored by the memories and frankly biases of George Knapp and Colm Kelleher, who continued to work with Bigelow after the fact, or it comes from these weird documents that kind of leak that are almost too wacky to be believed.
And just really quick about NDAs and something like this, it's like, okay, so let's say you're on the ranch, you sign an NDA, you see something really crazy, you come out and you say something about it, or you were like reported out, like, what is Bigelow going to do? Is he going to take legal action against you? Because then that is basically outing himself, right? He's basically saying, yes, this is big enough that I am going to go after you legally.
Well, it's sort of
stop you from talking, which makes more of a big deal out of it than if you don't.
Yeah, it's actually part of the larger question that's floating around right now in the UFO world of, well, if Luis Elizondo is telling the truth, why hasn't the government come out and quieted him? And the argument, I think, is very similar to what you're saying, Marie. That just adds fuel to the fire.
Well, yeah, it almost nullifies the need for an NDA. Like, there's a lot, culturally right now, it's sort of this watershed moment around the idea of NDAs and when do you use them? When are they appropriate? When are they sort of muzzles on free speech and whistleblowers? But I mean, an NDA really is the idea that in a more corporate environment that you're not going to take what you know and shop it around elsewhere. It's not so much, or that you see something that is intellectual property and you are not going to disclose it to another company.
Well, in some ways, the NDAs that Bigelow has these people sign, there's only one person paying people to investigate spooky ranches. So if that's your line of work and you tick that guy off, you're probably out of a job.
Well, unless you get the book deal.
Yeah, exactly. Unless you get the book deal, unless you can build up enough media attention that you yourself can turn this into kind of a cottage industry, But look at what happened to Bob Lazar. It took him how many years to kind of, I don't know, weasel his way back into the good graces of some of the people in Bigelow's orbit to get another bite at the apple. But I mean,
if you have something that's really that huge that you're going to break an NDA for, then you're going to then it should be warranted that that would be the reason you would do it, right? It's not just, sort of a afterthought. Like you went out and you had too much to drink and you're talking at a bar and you break an NDA. No, it's like, it would be a big deal. Anyways, I just think it's sort of interesting.
It is very interesting. And in this situation, I think, like what you're saying or hinting at, Marie, the NDA is a more it's almost more of a powerful tool as like a corporate
gag.
It is a way almost for Bigelow to be able to say, I no longer will pay you.
Right.
You know, as opposed to like an actual legal recourse kind of thing.
Right. It's sort of more of a threat than anything else.
Yes. So, Bigelow will found what comes to be known as NIDS around 1995. And the team, again, were those people that we talked about before. Their initial mandate, and so you can still find the NIDS website, nidsci.org, on the Wayback Machine. But so their initial kind of mission statement. Now, let's just step back a moment here. The NIDSci website appears to have been founded in like 2001. So it doesn't go all the way back to the beginning. You know, but the beginning was 95, so what were we going to see? You know, star wipes and whatever? Like, whatever. It's fine. But
so cool.
Anyways, this is on their kind of About Us section. So, quote, the National Institute for Discovery Sciences, NIDS, is a privately funded research organization. It focuses on scientific exploration that emphasizes emerging, novel, and sometimes unconventional observations and theories. In its programs, NIDS rigorously employs accepted scientific methods and maintains the highest ethical and quality standards. The Institute concentrates on exploring fundamental research on issues concerning the nature and evolution of life and consciousness in the universe and their modes of interaction. We are specifically interested in issues related to evidence for survival of consciousness beyond death and aerial phenomenology and related topics. A world-class science advisory board is assisting in designating and reviewing specific projects. Dissemination of the products of NIDS research will only occur once peer review has been accomplished. The means of dissemination of this information is through publication in scientific journals, our website, or other appropriate media accepted by the science community, end quote. Here's the thing. None of that last part about scientific review ever happens.
I was going to say, the peer, like all of your peer reviews, they're under NDA as well, so nobody's reviewing anything.
No, none of the peer review happens, and that's actually what often happens in UFO circles or in these weird circles like this. Is like let's take Puthoff, right? Puthoff's research field. He is famous in modern kind of patent law for having a patent case that went kind of ping-ponging back and forth between Puthoff and the U.S. Patent Office, where finally the Patent Office just kind of threw up their arms and were like, we can't tell if this is science, so we're just going to give you the damn patent. We can't find anyone to review this because you're the only person doing this kind of research in your field.
You've cornered the market.
Right, and since you're going to fight us on this kind of declaration that this is not scientifically valid, we're just going to let you have this one. You know, and if you do design kind of a Mad Hatter-esque ESP hat thing that you're designing, then great. You're going to make a lot of money. We'll see you at the launch party. So the problem with this, so the NID starts off, but to be fair, at the very beginning, they actually start off kind of with a bang. Because the first things that they come to with the table are those surveys, the statistical analysis of UFO sightings, of the public's perception of UFOs, of religious leaders' perceptions of the UFO question. When they first come onto the scene, they're bringing with them some of the actual statistical work that Bigelow and Alexander Bigelow funded and Alexander kind of spearheaded. So they actually come into this thing with something approaching scientific validity.
Yes.
Which is really cool.
And it's public.
Yes.
Ish.
And it's made public. It's on their website. So here's the problem, though. The people on this, the way that this is often talked about in podcasts and things is people will say, well, look, NIDS had all these great scientists on the board. Doesn't that mean that whatever they find is going to be great? No. The people on the scientific advisory board hardly went to the ranch at all. They would occasionally, and we know this from letters that have leaked since the time period, and also from the diaries of Jacques Vallée and interviews that others have given. The scientific advisory board primarily was meant to kind of be like a faraway board. They met occasionally in person, but they kind of communicated with each other and threw ideas around and helped develop each other's opinions or whatever. But ultimately, there was really never any data for them to analyze from the ranch. the main theme of Hunt for the Skinwalker is, again, these, werewolves with pants or whatever are continuously outwitting the NIDS team.
It's khakis.
So there's never anything to analyze ultimately.
No.
And on top of that
Yes.
too, besides the scientific advisory board really never being on the ranch, you also have the fact that the people that are on the ranch doing this kind of work are kind of like hired help. They're ranch hands and things. And so we know that from a couple of different places. However, this is actually from the NIDS website. So from their FAQ question, does NIDS employ field investigators? Answer, yes. NIDS does employ full-time investigators. However, NIDS only hires investigators with prior experience in law enforcement and forensics. These investigators primarily operate out of the NIDS headquarters in Las Vegas. Should NIDS have a field investigator position open, it will be announced on our employment opportunities page.
Oh, that would have been a good summer job.
And they actually have, they had at the time, on the Wayback Machine, you can occasionally see job postings. So at this point, in kind of the first point in 2001, they were looking for a veterinarian to do analysis of cattle mutilations, and they were looking for a former FBI investigator of some kind. Now, part of the reason that we know about kind of how the Scientific Advisory Board operated was the letters to Edgar Mitchell from Bigelow on NIDS letterhead have been put out there. They've made their way to the internet. So this is just, again, another quote from this, right? So this says, "Dear Dr. Mitchell, since a lot has happened in the past few weeks, I thought I would take this opportunity to give you a brief update and provide information about the next meeting. You will remember that it is scheduled for the evening of May 31st and the entire day of Saturday, June 1st. As usual, we would appreciate it if you would make your travel reservations as soon as possible. Again, the travel agency number is blank." And just for some context, this is sent on May 13th. At the upcoming of 96. At the upcoming meeting, I will discuss some organizational changes that are occurring on the consciousness side of NIDS. To support our research, I have facilitated a change in direction for the Consciousness Research Lab, CRL, and directed them to concentrate on survival of consciousness issues. The CRL status in UNLV provides an important adjunct to our research capabilities. Currently, we are working out the details, etc., etc. So, interesting stuff. Now, what's actually kind of interesting, too, in this is in this same letter, he actually mentions a piece of UFO debris that they think they've actually collected. That they believe they got tested at Lockheed Martin, supposedly, which many people believe might be one of the pieces of material that To the Stars Academy now has. But anyways, something interesting to just keep in the back of your head. So, we know from these letters and from Valet's kind of diaries and things that really this team has just kind of been, the Scientific Advisory Board meets relatively regularly, however, not all that frequently. Certainly not that they're on the ranch consistently. They're also bringing in speakers occasionally. And so those speakers are coming in and giving talks, and again, the team is kind of thinking about them and whatever. So really, in some ways, NIDS is more of a, again, if you're listening to the interview with MJ Banias we just posted, it's more of this kind of invisible college, almost like an academic, an academic center of research for this.
Yeah, it's like a master class.
So it's something of a reading club in some ways. But so that being said, the main people in NIDS who do appear to have been on the ranch regularly appear to have been Colm Kelleher, Hal Puthoff, John Alexander, and then Eric Davis. Those appear to be the main people who were on the ranch, at least semi-frequently, doing analysis and tests and whatever. But at the same time, they had field investigators also there pretty regularly. The work that NIDS did was basically broken up into two general camps. Into a couple of general camps. The main things that NIDS appears to have been researching is cattle mutilations, consciousness studies, UFO propulsion, but that's kind of almost more like, I don't know, UFO sightings, really. The statistical analysis of UFOs and related phenomena, abductions and crash research, like crash ships, and of course, spooky ranches in general.
Yes.
Yeah. So, a lot of the people that are on the ranch, though, we just, again, like, we don't know about them, right? But what we have been able to find out in recent years are some interesting things about, and listen, that, I don't know, being able to not find who was working on the ranch to me is, I don't know, Marie, do you think that's a big deal?
I think if there was someone of note, they would have said something. I mean, again, like if there was something worth finding that would have come out, they would have driven more of the narrative than they had. I mean, I think that, like you were saying, the narrative is driven by maybe 3 or 4 main people that have pretty cohesive stories about what happened.
Yeah.
It would be interesting. I think it would be fascinating to hear from just the general ranch hands about what their experience was and how much of it jives with what is much more put out there in books and documentaries and websites. Personally,
if we had access to someone who worked on the ranch, I would have a lot of questions for them. Like, I know what I would ask them, you know?
What would you ask them?
I would ask, now you're going to put me on the spot. Never said I do it. I would ask them, number one, did you follow a rigid protocol?
Oh, that's the first thing you'd ask?
Yeah. Like, were there controls in place, or did you just see spooky stuff sometimes?
Did you see spooky stuff?
No, I don't think that's, I honestly don't think that's as important. I think what's important is, I actually think that the most important thing would be, were they doing science? You know?
Well, yeah.
Because a lot of the reports we have, and again, we don't have a lot of reports from the time that NIDS was there, but the reports from later on, it makes it sound like these people were just paid to kind of sit on their butts.
Well,
you know,
I think that there might not have been enough. Yeah, when something spooky happens, it's like I think that it's so few and far between, or could be so few and far between, that to actually try and scientifically, you know, categorize it or understand it or get it into some sort of, I don't know, any kind of a protocol is it wouldn't be the first thing off the top of your mind. I mean, again, and like the people that are actually doing this, what's the turnover? We only know of these people. We only know of the ones that are writing the books that have this consistent narrative, but you don't really, or even the owners or the ex-owners that are still kind of there, just trying to maintain their cattle and trying to keep their livelihood going. But all of the anything that would have been the support, that would have been the majority of the work that was occurring, you have no idea. To your point. Which I think is interesting, because it's like all of this sort of top line stuff, but people that did the real work, no idea.
Yeah, it's like trying to figure out how a 7-Eleven operates by talking to the CEO of 7-Eleven.
Yes,
that guy does not know.
Yes,
he does
or
not.
Talking to the
meth
head that's wandering around in the parking lot, right? I mean, that's basically what it is.
Yeah, that guy has a better take on how the 7-Eleven gets run.
You don't know, right? I mean, he's like, it just shows up and it's amazing. And look, there's Slurpees. And you're like, okay, so that's Skinwalker, right? Like, it just shows up and there's a wolf and oh my God. But it's like, you have no idea. Like, do they have to, all of the stuff that keeps the thing operational? We have zero idea about it.
So, during this time period, NID starts in 95. Brewing around this time period is this idea in the UFO community about what are known as UFO hotspots. The UFO community also calls these kind of like UFO flaps. Another term for these, if you want to take the broader view of all this kind of spookiness, is a
hellhole. Sorry,
kind of like a hellhole or a vortex, or an area of high consciousness chakra or whatever.
Flap?
I don't know.
High consciousness chakra? Did you just hit me with chakra?
I did. I think vortex. Vortex is kind of the standard term, I guess, for people. But no, UFO flap is used a lot of the time, actually, in UFO subculture.
Okay.
Like many things about the UFO subculture, it seems to be a holdover from the 40s and 50s. But anyways, so a flap, like an area that has a UFO flap, or areas where it's a hard definition. It's not really a real definition of any sort, but basically you can think of areas where UFO sightings have a high concentration, or where you would expect to see them. So, for instance, a very famous one is around Mount Shasta, right? It's a very famous kind of vortex area. Another famous one is right off of the coast of California. The area where supposedly there's like an alien base under the water or something.
Oh, yes. Rob Lowe. Rob Lowe went to go see it.
Yes, Rob Lowe went
Malibu,
there.
Right? It was Malibu,
I think it was Malibu, something like that.
Beautiful.
So
beautiful underwater base.
There are other ones around there too. And so one of the most famous ones, or I guess almost infamous ones, is in the Uintah Basin in Utah, in an area that is known as... It's known for a lot of spooky stuff. It's not just known for UFOs. But this is one of a number of hotspots that appear to have been purchased by Robert Bigelow. Now, here's the thing.
Spooky ranches. File under Spooky Ranch.
File under Spooky Ranch. There is, of course, the famous Skinwalker Ranch. But there is also another ranch owned by Bigelow's company called the Mount Wilson Ranch. This one is much less well known, and it was purchased supposedly as about the same time that Skinwalker was purchased, around 96. The Mount Wilson Ranch was supposedly purchased as something of a control, and so it makes sense for his test, and it makes sense then that Bigelow was probably buying other properties as well. Maybe some as negative controls, right? Places that you don't expect to see stuff. However, we know that the Mount Wilson Ranch was purchased as a positive control. We know this because, first off, the legal documents show that Bigelow owns it, but also because George Knapp, confirmed this on Twitter. He said, quote, "It was a poltergeist. It was a positive control. Mount Wilson was purchased by Bigelow because it had a long history of both poltergeist haunting witness reports and UFO sightings on the property and in the general area, similar to Skinwalker, though not the same range of reported phenomena," end quote. So Bigelow's buying, that's 2 ranches we know of.
Right.
We have reason to suspect that there are others.
No, I'm just joking. Yeah.
We have strong reason to suspect that there are others, and we're going to discuss that in the conclusion of this series.
Yeah, and I think we'll definitely get into the details on it. But I mean, again, if you just look at who Bigelow is, and you apply the same logic to something like acquiring, like he is a collector. He acquires things. He doesn't leave anything up to chance. Like, he's not going to just take one thing or find one thing, right? He's going to go and he's going to corner the market on everything. It's what he did in his business, right? It was sort of his general philosophy. So why wouldn't he apply that to sequestering any kind of phenomenon or any kind of physical artifact that could be otherworldly, right? Of course, he's going to get that and sequester that and hide it someplace. But the same thing with actual property. That's what you do, is you buy as much of it, even if you're wrong, right? Even if it's not right or it's whatever. It's like, he's got a lot of money. He has a lot of ability to buy real estate and a lot of arms to buy real estate within his corporation. Why wouldn't you do that? That's par for the course for him, I would assume.
You can always offload land. Especially when you have so much money that you can withstand the kind of ebbs and flows of the market.
Yeah. And it's not like the stuff's expensive either.
No.
Like, spooky ranches are not going for a lot. It's
a good market to corner.
It's a buyer's market. Always spooky ranches, buyer's market.
The guy buys these spooky ranches. The most famous one is Skinwalker. Why this one becomes really like the center of testing, or why this one becomes, I don't know, why they choose. Maybe it's just because it's close, I guess. But, you know, it's close to Las Vegas. It's close enough, much closer than the other one.
See, I would still argue that it's an assumption, though, because it's known. It's known. Like, that's the only one we know of that
here's the thing.
Like that.
The Mount Wilson Ranch was known historically for being haunted. Do you know what I mean? Like, it was that already had a legend about it. Skinwalker Ranch was almost like a fresh slate. It was not known to be haunted. Like, the area was known to be a hot spot and whatever, but this particular ranch, this was like the perfect storm. It was a confluence of a bunch of different things all together. So I almost wonder if that's why this ranch became the test site and not, say, Mount Wilson or any of his other properties. Oh, see, I would still argue it's because it's the only one people are talking about. So it naturally becomes that because it has a book written about it. It's the one that was disclosed. So it's like, what if all of them were like that? But we just don't know. Oh, I see what you're saying. But that's true. Just don't know. That's true. That's true. This was the one that went public for whatever reason. And I'm not saying that there's a bunch of Skinwalker Ranch out there, but are, you know, hidden or whatever. But logically, it's like, well, history is written by, you know, or the saying history is written by the winners, right? But like that's like the same thing. It's like this is the one that you hear the most about, so you naturally assume that it is the one that was special. But it might not be. It might just be the one that got talked about. Somebody leaked it, and that was the one that just naturally now is in the public eye. Could be. It could actually, that's an interesting thing. It's kook theory. That's a very good kook theory, but it's true. Well, it's also, right? This is also the only ranch, again, I think, because this is the ranch that people have been paying attention to. Yeah. The Mount Wilson ranch is known of out there. I mean, we found it, right? Mm-hmm. And this other place is also not impossible to find. These other places aren't impossible to find by any means. We found them again. It's just a matter of digging and really, I think, I don't know. It's interesting to me that these are the ones that are being talked about mostly, and I wonder, like you're hinting at, is Skinwalker just known because the cat's already out of the bag? But and Skinwalker, when was Skinwalker really active, quote unquote active? 90s. That's true. It's 2020. All this stuff is old now. I mean, basically anything he owns at this point, he's already exhausted. He's had decades to kind of strip mine whatever. If there is something there that is of interest, he has it. It's something else now. We don't know about. All right. Yep. Sorry. No, it's true. It's completely killer, true. But true. So, Skinwalker Ranch. Here's the thing. There are other shows that do a tremendous job on Skinwalker Ranch. Yes. And we're not going to retread that ground. No. Because it's not as interesting to us as all the Bigelow stuff. There's a lot of other stuff around the ranch that we're going to talk about here that you will have not heard before. And there's stuff that we're going to find on Bigelow that you're not going to have heard before either, because he has not been the focus of these stories. The focus of the stories have been, again, the dogs with jobs. So if you want a really good episode or a good series on Skinwalker, check out Astonishing Legends. They did a great job. They did a really, really great job. Last podcast also did a series on Skinwalker. Almost every show has done an episode on Skinwalker. Yes, Forrest and Scott scared themselves silly with it. Oh my god, it's like watching it's like watching a dog fart itself awake. They get so afraid. So the history of Skinwalker Ranch, one thing that's never mentioned in these stories is, so let's start from, I guess, kind of the baseline. For those that don't know what Skinwalker Ranch is, in 1996, the Deseret News publishes a story about, and the Deseret News is kind of the Salt Lake City main newspaper, one of the main newspapers in Salt Lake City. They publish a story about a ranch owner whose family has had to give up on their property because of their herd of prize cattle is being mutilated in the night. Their dogs are being killed. Their home is being terrorized. And they don't know what's doing it. They don't understand what's doing it. But they've had these kind of sightings of werewolf-like creatures, of lights in the sky, of physical craft, of orbs, of people in the distance appearing and disappearing and seeming to merge into animals and come back. This family's just not having a great time on the ranch.
Who wrote that article? Do you know?
The Deseret News article?
Yeah.
I have it in my notes here, and it's going to be in the show notes too.
Okay. Van Eyck.
Here we go. So, this is actually about after they bought it. This one's by Leslie Whiting for the Deseret Morning News, but this is Mysteries of UFO Ranch in Spotlight. There was an earlier one though about the original one that I have someplace here in the back of wherever. But, anyways,
we'll have the post. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we'll have it.
Checking. Yeah.
Yes, we will definitely have it in the post, right? So, this story, I guess, starts with that Deseret News article. And then Bigelow hears about this ranch, decides to kind of purchase it, and he purchases the ranch for $200,000.
Nothing.
With the agreement to the owners that they can stay on the ranch. They can, if they want to stay, they can stay. They can leave their cattle on the ranch to graze and everything else. Mm-hmm. But he wants to be able to study what's happening on the ranch. And so the Shermans, the family that owns the ranch, decide, fine, we'll let that happen. But we want to be there. We want to be there to find out what's going on here too.
Yeah, and just to watch their cattle. I mean, like, that's a huge investment for a small business, right? It's like you sink all your money into something. It's not what you expected for whatever reason. I mean, that's a massive investment to try and move and do something different.
It's crazy, right?
Yeah.
So they decide that they're going to do that, right? Here we go.
Especially
So here's the original, by the way, here's the original story. The original story was called Frequent Flyers by Zach Van Eyck, staff writer of the Deseret News, June 30th, 96.
We should dig into him more, too.
Absolutely, right? Mm-hmm. And so this talks about Terry and Gwen Sherman. There's actually a quote here. Terry and Gwen Sherman wish some of the teeming intergalactic life would find somewhere else to hang out. For more than a year now, the Shermans' 480-acre ranch just south of 4th Duchesne in Uintah County has been a hotbed for UFOs and bizarre paranormal activity. Weirdness that even the Shermans, who've witnessed the strange happenings with their own eyes and video camera, have trouble accepting as reality. The Shermans, their teenage son and 10-year-old daughter, have seen 3 specific types of UFOs repeatedly during the past 15 months. A small box-like craft with a white light, a 40-foot-long object, and a huge ship the size of several football fields. They've seen one craft emit a wavy red ray or light beam as it flies around. They've seen other airborne lights, some of which have emerged from orange circular doorways that seem to appear in midair. They've videotaped 2 of the sightings. So yeah, not great. Right? Not great. But, and that's kind of the story of how the ranch comes into the spotlight. But the area itself has been considered weird by the inhabitants for 100 years at that point. Part of the overall story of Skinwalker Ranch, and of course, it should be obvious with a name like Skinwalker, is the relation of this land and this area and this mythology to native peoples that lived in the area.
Yes.
The problem with that is that there is very little evidence to support the idea that the Skinwalker story ever really existed in any serious way outside of so we know there appears to be agreement that the Navajo people have a story like a kind of Skinwalker.
Yeah.
And of course, every culture has something like a werewolf or a vampire or whatever. These people, these creatures that can, these evil, malevolent beings that can turn into or control the more vicious animals out there.
Yes.
But the idea of a skinwalker as it exists in the Skinwalker Ranch story appears to be a mixing of both some maybe traditional-esque stories from native peoples seen through the lens of settlers in a scary new area.
Yeah, I think.
Plus then the UFO angle on top of it.
And I think the idea of Skinwalker Ranch is really almost is in some ways a trope, right? Because if you didn't have that, what kind of nomenclature could you give this ranch that would make it sort of situational in some ways? You know what I mean? It's like you have these stories, all these stories seem to add up to be this trope of an identity that is sort of, again, just something that is almost, could be really superficial at best and just sort of a total false narrative at worst.
Yeah.
That is sort of, again, this idea of, these malevolent beings that are part of this other culture and they are afflicting your ranch and you're now giving them sort of this identity, and this identity is now part of this bigger, huge narrative that is blown up into the story of Skinwalker Ranch. But how much of that is actually anything that is true or about an indigenous group of people that lived there? Probably not a lot.
Yeah, and also
it's not even really relative in some ways. I would argue like a werewolf wearing khakis and a button down has more to do with post-colonial culture, and somebody seeing that and being like, yeah, that's like, and they're out there smoking a menthol and maybe having they're out there smoking a menthol and having a Pabst Blue Ribbon or something is much more to do with sort of our perception of reality than any other thing.
Yeah, it seems like with a lot of kind of ghost stories and things, that it's, if you can say, oh, it's on a burial ground, or it's, that is just a very powerful trope. And I do think that that's definitely something. At the same time too, I don't want people hearing the story to forget that this is an area that is like actually plagued historically with terrible mistreatment of people and history and wars and everything else. So there is reason to suspect or reason to believe that this area has a long and bloody history. Like, that's true.
Yes.
But part of that history is also invariably the history of
colonial
people coming in
into something else. Yeah.
So the initial kind of the ranch area itself, right? So 1861 is Lincoln creating by executive order a Uintah Valley Reservation, which is on the land that Skinwalker Ranch sits on. Mm-hmm. 1862, another reservation is created, the Uncompahgre. And then the 1880s, the Ute tribe is relocated to the reservation surrounding the ranch area. Mm-hmm. Right? Now, a lot of this information, there's a really good timeline from skinwalkerranch.org put up by Ryan Skinner. So check that out if you're interested in kind of all this nitty-gritty history stuff. However, I would argue that the most important pieces here, so 86, the Uintah Reservation is created, which merges those other two reservations. And then, in 1905, homesteaders come onto the reservation and start building stuff. And so take some land. So the original homesteaders are John and Emma Myers. They build the first homestead there. It's only a few small buildings. Now, one thing about this that I always kind of think is funny, or not, if not funny, but one aspect of this that I always think is kind of interesting is if you had people moving onto land that the government gave you, and you wanted to keep them from moving onto that land, don't you think a Scooby-Doo-esque story of haunted. It's haunted. There's werewolves. It's evil. It's a doesn't that seem, because indigenous people's telling us this is sacred land, this is a water source we need, this is whatever. None of that ever seems to work. The only time we seem to ever listen and stay off of the damn land is when they're like, there's ghosts there.
It's ghosts. Now you'd probably sell tickets for it, but I think what's interesting is like my guess is like the haunting, how they would perceive the haunting systemically is it would be the settlers, right? Like, the skinwalker is the settler. The skinwalker is the thing that's coming and displacing an entire culture. It's like you can't resell yourself to, I think I would love the idea of like that's what the story you would tell them to keep them off the land, except the story that you're telling is the haunting to the haunter.
Well, it's like, it's they had a real alien invasion. It happened.
Yes. Yeah.
That sucks.
Yeah. Yes.
That's a crazy thing.
Yes.
All right. Anyways, so between 1906 and 1911, there are earthquakes in the area that the local news is like, oh, spooky explosions. So that happens. Then in the period in between then, like 1915, supposedly a guy comes to the ranch dressed in a blue shining tracksuit and is like, give me water, human. And the owner's like, whatever. But we have no corroboration of that. We can't find any evidence for it. Whatever. In the 30s, the ranch becomes held by Kenneth John Myers and Edith Child Myers. They appear to be the descendants of the original family that homesteaded there. Mm-hmm. Every time I read about these people, I thought they were the original owners because evidently there are like just not a lot of names going around in Utah at the time. There's like Emma or Edith or John or Kenneth John. It's confusing. Anyways, 30s, they take over the ranch. They change where it is, where the homestead is, I should say, and build it into the kind of the area that will become purchased by the Shermans eventually in the 90s. So, between the 40s and 50s, there are sporadic but regular UFO sightings in the area. This is the time where Junior Hicks is really starting to become interested. Local people are reporting things. There's mass sightings. There's all kinds of interesting stuff going on. So the UFO flap in the Uintah Basin is really considered to have occurred between the kind of 50s and 60s, and then another one occurs in the late 70s, like 78, around there. So on top of all of this, there are all kinds of other sort of conspiratorial timeline hits, right? So like NASA builds an observatory near the ranch and then shuts it down years later. Mm-hmm. And so that is supposed to be conspiratorial, like, NASA was there, but it's like, it's in the middle of nowhere. There's no light pollution. Perfect place for an observatory. Yeah. There's not that, that's where I'd put an observatory. It's not weird or anything else. So, in 87, the Myers leave the ranch. They just leave it empty. So 87, they leave the ranch.
And that is a little strange, right? I mean, like leaving it just empty and not selling it or not caring about it or not staying there.
I mean, is it though? Like, there's a lot of houses I don't know. I travel a lot for work, and I go to a lot of neighborhoods and places that are like, people have houses they just don't fill. You know? I don't know. My aunt and uncle own a house in Pennsylvania that they don't go to. It's like a vacation home, quote unquote.
Party at their house? No, I think it depends on why they left it. Like, could they not sell it just because of economic conditions? I mean, 87, or
honestly,
they had a different job. There's a lot to it.
They became the owners in the 30s.
Yeah.
By the late 80s, they are old. You know what I mean?
This is true.
They're in their 70s.
Yeah.
They're in their 70s if both survive to that point, they're in their 70s. Mm-hmm. So they might have just been like, we can't live on a ranch anymore. We need to go to a home. Or we need to move to Boca. Or, you know what I mean? Like anything else.
Boca Vista. Yeah.
So seriously, like, I don't know. To me, that part is interesting, but it's not like spooky. I don't know. But so anyways, the NIDS team forms then. So, okay. 87, the Myers leave the ranch. 94, Terry and Gwen Sherman will buy the ranch. And that's when the weird stuff starts to them almost immediately. 95, NIDS forms. 96, the Deseret News has this article about this guy being like, my ranch is too haunted for my own good. And so Bigelow buys it for $200,000.
My ranch is too haunted. Oh, yes. And
as far...
Again, not a lot of money. It's not a lot of money.
Yeah, it's not a lot of money.
No.
Evidently, the only thing that seems to have occurred on the ranch are a bunch of kind of random little scary-ish events. Like nothing huge. There's no, the biggest, I think, event that occurs to the NIDS team is their cameras have lines seemingly cut or kind of pulled out of them or something. But nothing, as far as we know, nothing scientifically verifiable comes from the ranch. Nothing really of interest. But while at the ranch, Bigelow will become involved in a scandal with MUFON, known as the Carpenter Affair. If you remember the name John Carpenter from the last episode, we talked about him. Yes. He was MUFON's head of abduction research from 1991 to around the year 2000. So he was working with Bigelow and Stanton Friedman. He kind of knew Bigelow from Linda Moulton Howe. This guy, just kind of, they ran in the same circles, right? John Schuessler, who would become the head of MUFON, was on NIDS at this time. So, Bigelow was involved in MUFON to some extent. However, what becomes known due to the good work of people like Jack Brewer over at the UFO Trail, so go check out that website, it's great. What appears to happen in the mid-90s is Bigelow begins to buy case information from John Carpenter that is supposed to be confidential between abductees and the people performing their therapy sessions. So this becomes known as the Carpenter Affair because John Carpenter is the one seemingly or supposedly selling these cases to Bigelow and the NIDS team overall.
Which is crazy because it's almost like, again, if you just think about now, sort of the idea of privacy around your own medical records. I mean, this, roughly translated, I would consider a medical record. It's about something that you feel that happened to you that is affecting your mental state, and you're telling it to somebody that I guess is not exactly a doctor, but still has some sort of responsibility to treat it with respect and with some privacy. And it's, again, it's just all data's up for sale.
Yeah. So supposedly this part of the story involves, so the way that this supposedly worked was through Carpenter's work with MUFON, he was performing abductee research. So people that had abductions would give kind of a general statement of what their abduction was about or how it happened. Based on some of MUFON's kind of internal criteria, they would determine that a case was of interest or not. And then from that, Carpenter and his team would investigate those abductions. Supposedly, we know this, 140 cases were sold to Bigelow.
Yeah.
And the NIDS team. Without the consent of those, being interviewed.
Yeah.
So, and these are some quotes actually directly from Carpenter in some responses via email to Jack Brewer from the UFO blog. So, or the UFO Trail blog. So, quote, again, this is Carpenter speaking, quote, Bob Bigelow is a low-key, quiet man who has an avid and serious interest in the paranormal for all the right reasons. Because he worked hard for years at real estate and investments, he eventually made enough money to fund projects that would further research, bring answers, and take a much-needed, serious, scientific, and psychological look at the UFO field. All the serious researchers knew him as well as he made a point of connecting with the best ones to see what they needed or what projects he could help with. He funded projects for Bud Hopkins, Stanton Friedman, Linda Moulton Howe, David Jacobs, myself, Dr. John Mack, George Knapp, MUFON, and more. And then he followed this up with a further email saying, Bob Bigelow is a kind-hearted, generous individual who avidly sought answers in professional, credible directions. He helped bring researchers together to discuss issues while staying discreetly in the background. He helped fund the historical MIT Abduction Study Conference in Boston in '92. He helped fund the famous Roper poll on how many Americans may have been abducted. This was the poll that NIDS started out with. This led then to another effort to train mental health professionals in abduction knowledge and therapy skills by way of major professional conferences for mental health professionals only. These were held successfully in New York, Atlanta, LA, and Chicago, with John Mack, Bud Hopkins, David Jacobs, and myself as speakers. Bob wanted all the best for quality research and proper treatment of abductees. I first met Bob when he tagged along with Linda Moulton Howe as she visited Southwest Missouri to work with me on several interesting abduction cases. Her subsequent film production became the pilot special that evolved into the long-running show, Sightings. Bob said he was impressed with my hypnotherapy skills and professionalism. He later on flew me to Las Vegas, Tucson, Vancouver Island, and Nevada to help abduction cases he had become aware of. He also helped fund the investigation in New Mexico of Gerald Andresen's claims with myself and Stanton Friedman. Eventually, Bob created the NIDS team in Las Vegas so the top scientists in other fields of professional expertise could study paranormal events. We're going to skip over this stuff because it's not important. But so he says they would secretly convene once a month and study various cases and projects. I had the wonderful opportunity to give a presentation on abductions to this incredible panel of experts. Then he says, based on some of that background on Bigelow, I want to clarify some of this other stuff. So he says, he, meaning Bigelow, wanted some of the top professional minds to study abduction data. I agreed to confidently share data from a number of my cases by blacking out names and identifying data to protect my cases while giving top scientists a taste of what is being reported in abduction research. Despite rumors on the internet, I never sold my cases. And then he blames his ex-wife for starting that. So, cool. Then he says...
The ex-wife's fault.
Anyways, for the record, all of my 140-plus cases remain complete, intact, and unchanged, all in my possession, if anybody cares to drop by my house just to be certain. Bob Bigelow only reimbursed me for my time and costs to work on selecting, preparing, and sending data. However, I have heard that most of it never got reviewed and probably sits in some closet as priorities and more exciting projects came along.
Yeah, he just collected it.
Anyways,
right?
That's the end of that. But
again, he collected it. Like, he just is low key, right? I mean, if you listen to Carpenter, he's just low key. He's not, there wasn't a strong arm in any of this. It was all for the greater good. But what it ends up with is like, this information is gone, right? I mean, it's private information, and it's pretty much now it's with one person.
It sure is.
See? Yeah, man.
And so that's what happens, right?
Yeah.
So what ends up happening then is, that really nothing else of interest really happens with NIDS. And actually, we end up getting stories from people that were supposedly working in NIDS coming out after the fact. So NIDS will eventually go under in 2004. NIDS becomes shuttered. However, Bigelow's time at the ranch doesn't stop there. Bigelow still owns the ranch from 2004. 2005, Hunt for the Skinwalker comes out, which is considered, the kind of big story there on the ranch itself. It kind of really sets the stage for things. And that book gets a tremendous amount of play, and it's written by Colm Kelleher and George Knapp. So again, it's covered by many other podcasts. Go take a listen. The important point there, though, is that, again, this is a story that this is a story that Bigelow wants to come out.
Yeah.
They would not have published this book without his express permission.
No.
Especially given the NDAs.
Wholeheartedly the truth. Yes.
Especially given the NDAs.
Well, I think that's just wholeheartedly the truth. That that is the story of it that is the most palatable that has come out. That's what he wants out. Yeah.
Yeah. So, 2004 NIDS ends, but 2007, Bigelow is given an interesting ask, I guess you would say, for a military official to come check out the ranch. And that is going to be the sort of start of what we today know as ATIP. NIDS becomes ATIP, and that's what we're going to get into next episode, and it's the same story again. It's the same people, so get ready for it, people.
But until then, happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween! Thank you again, dear listeners, for listening to the Mad Scientist podcast. I have been your host, Chris Cogswell, joined by my co-host,
Marie Mayhew.
If you'd like to contact the show, please send us an email at themadscientistpodcast@gmail.com. That's all one word. You can also follow us on Twitter at MadScientistPod or at Team Giant Squid for Marie. And of course, you can see us on Facebook, on Instagram, and all over the internet as the Mad Scientist Podcast. And again, our logo is the one with the pumpkin head, so it's easy to see. If you've enjoyed the show tonight, please consider supporting us on Patreon, where the money that you give to us will help us to promote this show further, to make it better, and just to spend more time making it.
Yes, we love doing that.
We do love doing that. Our logo was designed by Carrie Shaheen. Our web design is done by Desdemona Howard.
Woohoo!
And our sound design is done by Jake Cardinal. Thanks again for listening.
Thank you. This has been a Damn It Chippy production.